Hi, everybody. So, the last video in this series that I made was all about the fifth interval, and in some ways, the relationship between 1 and 5, or tonic and dominant, is the fundamental principle behind tonal harmony. But what if you want to use tonal chords like major and minor triads, but don't want to feel like you have to follow the implied rules of tonal harmony? Well, there's quite a bit of music, especially from the 20th century, that uses simple chords like major and minor triads and doesn't adhere to the rules of functional tonal harmony. The minimalist movement, for example, composers like John Adams or Philip Glass, used simple chords in these ways. Here's a harmonic reduction of the first few measures of Philip Glass's sixth movement of his third string quartet. This is a complete phrase, and you'll notice that there's no dominant harmony at all. The piece is built from phrases like this one after the other. The harmonic structure in place isn't designed around the harmonic relationship between 1 and 5, and thus the form of the piece is more about the evolution of timbres, textures, dynamics, and rhythms over time. Film composers throughout the last 50 years or so have really gravitated towards harmonic structures that feature simple major and minor chords using non-functional tonal relationships and progressions. Here's a harmonic reduction to an excerpt from the score to The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring by Howard Shore. If you had to say what key this excerpt is in, you wouldn't really be able to because it's constantly shifting. While, of course, there are moments in functional tonal music that might shift around in a similar way, typically there's a larger harmonic structure governing those types of shifts. This progression of chords in this excerpt is instead formed primarily by root motion of thirds. When I say non-functional tonal harmony, this is a perfect example of that. Each chord change from measure to measure isn't governed by a specific function within an overall tonal key area. Instead, this is a completely linear harmonic structure, meaning the relationship between adjacent chords, one after the other, is what matters. We start here in B flat minor, then move to F sharp minor. The root moves down by the enharmonic equivalent to a major third. Then from the F sharp minor, we move back up to the B flat minor chord. So at this point, maybe we're thinking that B flat minor is the tonal key area. Next, we go to C sharp minor. That's another root motion by thirds, this time a minor third. So now maybe we'd expect to go back to the B flat minor sonority, but no, we go to an F minor chord, another root motion by third. Okay, that's fine. F minor is related to B flat minor, so maybe now we'll return to B flat minor. Nope, we have a chromatic shift down to E minor, and then another shift by a third. We start to realize that there's no hierarchy of tonal areas, just chord after chord, moving along mostly by thirds in the roots. Forming major and minor chords from roots moving by thirds has been discussed quite a bit by music theorists studying music from the late 19th century or music from films like in this example. I consider this type of progression to fit under the larger category of chord progressions I'll refer to as common tone progressions. If I just look at major and minor triads, so chords made from 3 notes, then any 2 different chords have either 2 notes in common, 1 note in common, or 0 notes in common. Let's look at the C major triad as our example. From C major, there are only 3 major or minor triads that have 2 common tones: C minor, E minor, and A minor. From C major to C minor, the root and fifth are shared, and the third moves by half step. From C major to E minor, the E and G are shared, and the C moves a half step to B natural. And from C major to A minor, the C and E are shared, and the G moves to A. When 2 of the 3 notes stay the same, the resulting harmonic shift feels very closely related to the first chord. It doesn't seem like we've had to travel any great distance, harmonically speaking. From C major, there are 9 triads that share 1 common tone. C major shares the note C with A flat major, F major, and F minor. It shares the note E with E major, C sharp minor, and A major. and it shares the note G with G major, G minor, and E flat major. The single note that is shared becomes very important in the voice leading between adjacent chords. It can make chords that are otherwise distantly related seem somewhat connected, these progressions in particular. And you'll notice that 4 out of these 5 progressions outlined in red have root motion by thirds. These are the types of progressions often used by composers like Howard Shore in the examples before, and by many other film and concert composers in the 20th and 21st centuries. So in comparison to the progressions with 2 shared tones, these progressions feel like we travel a bit more between them, harmonically speaking, but not nearly as far as those progressions that share no common tones. Because there are no shared tones between these chords, all of the voices must change, meaning the voice leading between chords is inherently less smooth. Harmonically speaking, the distance traveled between chords is greater than any of the progressions from the first 2 columns. These progressions almost imply more of a sense of motion or instability than the others. Now, before I continue, I should add, I only show major and minor triads, and of course you could look at augmented, diminished, or any other type of triad. And then of course you can look at common tones shared between tetrachords and chords with more than 4 notes even. So how might I construct a progression of more than just 2 chords using this methodology? Here's an example of a progression with 2 shared tones between every adjacent chord. This results in a very smooth and very stable sounding progression. And here's an example then of a progression with 1 shared tone between every adjacent chord. Perhaps less smooth than the last, but not jarring because of that common tone. You'll also notice that the end of this phrase features a dominant to tonic relationship between B minor and F sharp major. At any point when forming these kinds of progressions, you can obviously still make use of the relationship between 1 and 5, and 1 and 5 obviously share that one common tone. In the moment, it sounds like I'm tonicizing B minor, but really, if this progression were to continue, there's nothing really holding me to that tonic area. That's the main difference here between this line of thinking and functional tonal harmony. So the last example I'll show is one that uses a combination of 2, 1, and 0 common tones between adjacent chords. I'll show in red the number of common tones between chords. As I play through this progression, try and listen for the differences between chord changes with different numbers of shared tones. I think you'll notice that the 1 chord change with 0 common tones stands out in a really interesting way. When you're making chord progressions yourself, it's good to be aware of the effect each harmonic shift has on the listener. It may be that the most striking chord change in your progression, in fact, has 0 common tones. It certainly stands out in this one because it's so unique in comparison to the others. The last thing I want to mention is that when you create a harmonic progression like this, you can add additional notes either in the harmony or as passing melodic tones that serve as extended common tones. For instance, looking at this example, I notice that if I add the major 7th to one of these C major chords, I'm creating an additional shared tone between it and the E minor chord. Adding 7th, 2nd, or really any extended chord tone can bridge 2 otherwise distantly related chords. In the supplemental portion of this video available on my Patreon page, I talk more about how to smoothly move between triads with no shared common tones. And one of the best ways is to find a fourth tone that can bridge those two chords. I'll adjust this example ever so slightly by adding some additional tones via a melodic idea over these chords. And I'll circle in red the additional notes in the melody that help create smoother voice leading between adjacent chords. So that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll definitely be discussing the concept of common tone progressions more in the near future. Please check out my Patreon page. The supplemental video for this topic is on there now, and I go into even more detail with more examples. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.